Part 1. The day my own daughter asked bank security to throw me out, I thought humiliation had finally found its limit. Emily stood only a few feet away, pointing at me as if I were a confused stranger instead of the woman who had raised her. Every eye in the lobby turned toward me while the security guard took a cautious step in my direction. I never raised my voice. I simply looked at him and said, "Before you escort me out, would you please call Mr. Robert Harris?" The moment the bank manager heard my name, everything changed. If this story touches your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me until the very end. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe if you enjoy heartfelt family stories, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own child treated you this way? And before we begin, I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Reading your comments always reminds me that none of us is truly alone. Part 2. My name is Sophia Carter, and for most of my life, I was the kind of woman people noticed only when they needed something. A permission slip signed, a casserole delivered, a birthday remembered, a school fundraiser organized, a sick child picked up early because everyone else was too busy. I was a mother, a wife, a teacher, a neighbor, and for more years than I care to count, I convinced myself that being needed was the same as being valued. I was 68 years old that morning at the bank, though I did not feel old when I woke up. Tired, yes, lonely sometimes, but not old, not helpless, not confused, not the fragile woman my daughter had slowly begun describing to other people. I lived in a modest brick house on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. The same house my husband Daniel and I bought when we were young enough to believe 30 years sounded like forever. It had white shutters, a maple tree in the front yard, and a back porch where Daniel used to drink coffee every morning before leaving for work. After he passed, the house became quieter in a way I still cannot properly explain. Silence has different shapes after you lose your husband. There is the silence of an empty chair, the silence of 2 coffee cups becoming one, the silence of reaching across the bed in the middle of the night and finding cold sheets where warmth used to be. Daniel had been gone almost 3 years by then, but some mornings I still expected to hear him humming in the bathroom while shaving. He always hummed old Motown songs off key, and whenever I teased him about it, he would say, "Sophia, God gave me a joyful heart, not a choir voice." That morning, I stood at the kitchen counter longer than usual, holding my coffee with both hands, looking at the small framed picture of him beside the fruit bowl. It was taken on our 40th wedding anniversary. He wore a navy suit, I wore a cream-colored dress, and his hand rested gently on my shoulder, like he was still promising to keep me steady. "You would tell me not to be nervous," I whispered. Of course, the photograph did not answer, but in my memory, Daniel did. "Walk in with your head up, Sophie. You earned every inch of that respect." He was the only person who ever called me Sophie. To everyone else, I was Sophia Carter, Mrs. Carter to my former students, Mom to Emily, Grandma Soph to the children at church who were not actually my grandchildren but had claimed me anyway, and widow. That word still felt like a coat I had never chosen but was forced to wear everywhere. I had retired from teaching 2nd grade 5 years before Daniel died. For 34 years, I taught children how to sound out words, tie their shoes, apologize when they hurt someone, and believe they were smarter than the world sometimes made them feel. I loved my work, even on the days it exhausted me. Children are honest in a way adults forget how to be. If they love you, they tell you. If they are afraid, they show you. If they need help, they reach for your hand. Adults hide everything behind smiles and paperwork. Daniel owned a small construction company that started with 1 truck, 2 ladders, and a dream bigger than both of us. Over time, Carter Custom Builders became known around Columbus for honest work. Daniel built kitchens, porches, church additions, and later small commercial properties. People trusted him because his handshake meant something. But what most people never knew was that Daniel was the dreamer, and I was the keeper. He could read blueprints better than anyone, but I balanced the checkbooks. He charmed clients, but I filed the taxes. He negotiated contracts, but I tracked invoices, insurance policies, retirement accounts, and every dollar that moved in and out of our lives. Daniel used to laugh and say, "Folks think I built this family business, but your mama here kept it from falling through the floor." I never needed credit. I only needed stability. We had both grown up watching money arguments tear families apart. So from the beginning of our marriage, we promised each other two things: never lie about money, and never let money become more important than love. For a long time, I believed we had taught Emily that. Emily Turner, my only child, was 43 that year. Beautiful, smart, sharp-tongued when she felt cornered, and ambitious in a way that made strangers admire her before they truly knew her. She worked as a marketing director for a medical supply company, wore tailored blazers, drove a white SUV, and spoke in the kind of confident tone that made people assume she was right, even when she was not. When she was little, Emily was attached to my hip. She used to sit at the kitchen table coloring while I graded spelling tests. She would ask me questions about everything. Why do people get old? Why does Daddy work so much? Can a person be rich and still be sad? That last question had stayed with me for years. Back then, I would kiss her forehead and say, "A person can have everything and still lose themselves if they forget what matters." I wish I knew when she stopped listening. The morning I went to the bank, I had not told Emily about the appointment. That was not an accident. It was a decision I had made after months of prayer, restless nights, and conversations with Daniel's attorney, Michael Brooks. On my kitchen table sat a brown leather folder Daniel had given me years earlier. Inside were estate documents, trust summaries, account statements, and a letter in Daniel's handwriting that I had read so many times the fold lines had begun to soften. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the folder into my purse. Not because I did not understand what I was doing. Not because I was confused, but because doing the right thing can still hurt when the people you are protecting yourself from are your own blood. I wore a soft blue blouse, my dark gray slacks, and the pearl earrings Daniel bought me after our 25th anniversary. I took extra time brushing my silver-streaked hair back neatly. I even put on lipstick, the rose-colored one Emily once said made me look too dressed up for errands. That comment had stung more than it should have, but I wore it anyway. Before leaving, I checked the stove twice, locked the back door, and paused in the hallway beside the wall of family photographs. Emily at her high school graduation, Emily holding her college diploma, Emily on her wedding day smiling beside Jason Turner, the man Daniel never fully trusted but tolerated because he loved our daughter. There were no recent photos of the three of us together. That realization made my chest ache. Outside, the air was crisp, and the maple leaves scattered across the driveway like pieces of old gold. I drove my 10-year-old Buick carefully through the neighborhood, passing the elementary school where I once taught. Children were lined up outside with backpacks nearly bigger than their bodies, their teachers guiding them with practiced patience. For one brief moment, I missed the noise, the laughter, the small hands tugging on my sleeve. Then the light turned green and I kept driving. The bank was located downtown in a polished building with tall windows and marble floors that always made my footsteps sound louder than they were. Daniel and I had opened our first business account there more than 20 years earlier. Back then, we sat across from a young assistant manager named Robert Harris, who had treated us with respect even when our account balance was small. Now Mr. Harris was the branch manager. He knew things about our finances that my own daughter did not, and that was exactly why I trusted him. My appointment was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I arrived at 9:45 because Daniel always said being early was a form of respect. I parked near the entrance, sat in the car for a moment, and looked down at my hands resting on my purse. For the first time that morning, fear whispered through me. Not fear of the bank, not fear of paperwork, fear of what might happen once Emily eventually learned that I had not surrendered control of my life the way she expected me to. For the past year, she had been circling my finances like a storm cloud. At first, she called it concern, then practicality, then responsibility. But concern has a warmth to it. Emily's concern felt cold, measured, hungry. Still, she was my daughter. And a mother's heart can recognize danger and love in the same person, which is one of the cruelest things about family. I opened my purse and touched the edge of Daniel's folder. "I'm here," I whispered, though I was not sure whether I was speaking to him, to God, or to the woman I had been before everyone started treating me like I was disappearing. Then I stepped out of the car, lifted my chin, and walked into the bank. At that moment, I believed I was simply going to sign a few documents and quietly protect the future Daniel had left for me. I had no idea that before the hour was over, my daughter would point at me in that lobby and ask security to remove me like I was a trespasser. And I had no idea that what happened next would expose the truth she had worked so hard to hide. If you had asked me 5 years earlier whether my daughter would one day try to take control of my life, I would have laughed. Not because Emily was perfect. She never was. But because I believed I understood her heart. That was my first mistake. The change didn't happen all at once. It never does. It came quietly disguised as concern, wrapped in the kind of language that sounds loving if you don't listen too carefully. The first time I noticed it was about a year after Daniel passed. Emily had come over on a Sunday afternoon. She brought store-bought pie instead of baking one like she used to, and she spent more time on her phone than talking to me. At one point, she stood in the kitchen doorway watching me write out a check to the electric company. "Mom," she said casually, "you're still doing everything by hand?" I looked up. "I've been doing it this way for 40 years. She gave a small laugh, the kind that wasn't really a laugh. "Yeah, but things are different now. You could forget something. Miss a payment. Forget." That word lingered in the air longer than it should have. "I haven't missed a payment yet," I replied calmly. "I'm just saying," she continued, stepping closer. "It might be time to simplify things. Maybe I could help you set up automatic payments. Or better yet," she paused, "we could put my name on your accounts. Just in case." Just in case. Back then I smiled and shook my head gently. "I appreciate that, sweetheart, but I'm managing just fine." She didn't argue. Not that day. But something shifted. After that, the suggestions came more often. At first, they sounded reasonable. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing? That house is too much for you. Mom, you don't need to keep track of all those accounts. It's confusing. Mom, what if something happens to you? Someone should have access." Each sentence carried the same quiet implication: you are no longer capable. I began to notice the way she watched me when I spoke, like she was waiting for me to forget a word. The way she corrected small details in front of others. The way she would repeat things I said slightly differently, as if she were translating me into something more reliable. At first I told myself she was grieving, that losing her father had shaken her, that maybe control made her feel safe. But grief doesn't explain everything. Jason Turner, her husband, entered the picture more clearly around that time. Jason had always been charming in a polished, practiced way. He sold real estate, which meant he knew how to say exactly what people wanted to hear. Daniel used to say, "That man smiles too quickly and listens too slowly." I didn't fully understand what he meant until later. Jason began showing up to more of Emily's visits. He would sit at my kitchen table, leaning back in his chair, talking about the housing market, investment opportunities, and smart financial moves. One afternoon, he tapped the table lightly and said, "Sophia, have you ever thought about the equity in this house? You're sitting on a gold mine here." "This house is my home," I replied. "Of course," he said quickly, raising his hands. Of course. But homes can also be assets. You could sell, move somewhere smaller, and free up a lot of cash. Emily nodded beside him. It just makes sense, Mom. You don't need all this space. I looked at both of them, something inside me tightening. I didn't buy this house because I needed space, I said softly. I bought it because it's where my life is. Jason smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. And life changes. Yes, it does, but not always in the way people expect. Over the next few months, the conversations became less like suggestions and more like plans I hadn't agreed to. Emily started bringing paperwork. Mom, I printed out something simple, she said one evening, placing a folder in front of me. It's just a power of attorney form, nothing dramatic. It just means I can help you if needed. I didn't open it. I don't need that, I said. She sighed, clearly frustrated. Why are you being so stubborn? Another word that didn't belong to me, but she kept trying to make it fit. I'm being careful, I replied. Jason leaned forward slightly. It's not about trust, Sophia. It's about preparation. It is about trust, I said quietly, meeting his eyes for the first time in a long while. The room fell silent. Emily's expression hardened. So you don't trust us? I took a slow breath. I trust myself. That answer didn't satisfy her. After that, the tone changed again. Emily began telling other people she was worried about me. I heard it first from a neighbor. She was saying you've been forgetting things lately. Mrs. Collins mentioned gently one morning while we were watering our plants. I told her you seemed just fine to me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Forgetting things. That word again. It followed me like a shadow after that. At church, a woman I barely knew asked if I needed help organizing my finances. At the grocery store, Emily insisted on checking my list as if I might buy the wrong things. At family gatherings, she would interrupt me mid-sentence, finishing my thoughts for me, even when she got them wrong, and each time she wore the same expression, concern. But there is a difference between concern and control. Concern asks. Control assumes. I began to keep notes. At first it felt unnecessary, even a little paranoid. But something inside me, something Daniel had always trusted, told me to pay attention. I wrote down dates, conversations, requests, moments when Emily tried to push me into decisions I hadn't agreed to, moments when Jason spoke for her, moments when I felt for the first time in my life like I was being slowly erased from my own story. One evening, after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened Daniel's leather folder. Inside, among the documents, was his letter. His handwriting was steady, confident, unmistakably his. Sophia, it began, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to stand beside you. But that doesn't mean you're alone. You are stronger than anyone gives you credit for, sometimes even yourself. My eyes blurred as I continued reading. I know how people change when money, fear, and time begin to mix. I've put things in place to protect you, not just financially, but from pressure. Trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. Not Emily, not Jason, myself. From then on, I listened more carefully. I watched more closely. I stopped dismissing the unease in my chest as overthinking, because it wasn't overthinking, it was warning. The final shift came about 3 months before the day at the bank. Emily called me late in the evening. Mom, she said, her voice unusually direct, we need to have a serious conversation. My heart sank slightly. About what? About your future, she replied. And what's best for you? Not what I wanted, not what I needed, what was best for me. I'm doing just fine, I said. No, she said firmly. You think you are, but you're not seeing the bigger picture. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not concern, not love, authority. "I'll come by this weekend," she continued. "We'll go over everything, accounts, property documents. It's time to get things organized." I understood then more clearly than ever before that she wasn't asking. She had already decided, and that was the moment I made my own decision. I would not argue. I would not fight. I would not allow myself to be pushed into anything. But I would prepare, quietly, carefully, completely. So when I walked into that bank a few days later, I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I wasn't vulnerable. I was ready. Emily just didn't know it yet. The bank lobby felt colder than I remembered. Not because of the temperature, but because of the tension already waiting for me when I walked in. At first, everything looked normal. The polished marble floors reflected the morning light. Customers stood in line, speaking in low voices. A teller smiled politely as I passed. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had imagined the uneasiness that had followed me all morning. Then I saw her, Emily. She stood near one of the desks on the right side of the lobby, dressed in a fitted charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back neatly, her posture confident and controlled. Beside her stood Jason, one hand resting casually in his pocket, scanning the room like he was evaluating property instead of standing in a bank. And in front of them sat Mr. Robert Harris. My steps slowed, but I did not stop. They hadn't seen me yet. For a few seconds, I simply watched. Emily leaned forward slightly, speaking in a low but firm tone. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Concerned about her decision-making. Not as sharp as she used to be, were trying to prevent any financial mistakes. Each phrase landed like a quiet blow. Not sharp enough to draw attention from the room, but sharp enough to cut through me. Jason nodded occasionally, adding something under his breath, his expression calm, almost rehearsed. Mr. Harris, on the other hand, did not look convinced. His posture remained professional, but there was a subtle tension in his shoulders. He listened carefully, hands folded on the desk, eyes moving between Emily and Jason in a way that suggested he was weighing more than just their words. That was when I understood. They had come before me. They hadn't just planned to talk to me. They had planned to get ahead of me, to shape the narrative, to make me look like the problem before I even walked through the door. A younger version of myself might have turned around in that moment. Might have left quietly, gone home, cried in the kitchen, and told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But I was no longer that woman. I adjusted the strap of my purse, lifted my chin, and walked forward. "Good morning, Mr. Harris." My voice was steady, clear, undeniable. All three of them turned at once. Emily's expression changed instantly. For a fraction of a second, something close to shock crossed her face. Then it disappeared, replaced by a tight, controlled smile. "Mom." Emily's expression changed instantly. For a fraction of a second, something close to shock crossed her face. Then it disappeared, replaced by a tight, controlled smile. "Mom," she said, standing up quickly. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I almost smiled. "I have an appointment," I replied calmly. Jason's eyes narrowed slightly, though his smile remained. "We didn't know you were coming in today, Sophia." "No," I said. "You didn't." Mr. Harris stood up, his expression shifting into something warmer when he looked at me. "Mrs. Carter," he said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you." I shook it gently. "Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you making time for me." Mr. Harris stood up, his expression shifting into something warmer when he looked at me. "Mrs. Carter," he said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you." I shook it gently. "Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you making time for me. Emily stepped closer, her tone changing just enough for others nearby to hear. Mom, we were just talking about you, she said, placing a light hand on my arm. We're a little worried. There it was again. I heard, I replied quietly. Her hand stiffened on my arm. What do you mean, she asked. I said, meeting her eyes, I arrived early enough to hear part of your conversation. The air shifted. Jason's posture straightened. Emily's smile faded. Mr. Harris cleared his throat slightly. Perhaps we should move this conversation into my office. Yes, I said. I think that would be best. Emily hesitated. For the first time since I had walked in, she looked uncertain, but only for a moment. Then she nodded. Of course, that makes sense. We walked together toward the glass-walled office at the back of the lobby. I could feel eyes following us, curiosity building in quiet glances and whispered assumptions. Inside the office, the door closed softly behind us, and suddenly the space felt smaller, more contained, more honest. Mr. Harris gestured toward the chairs. Please have a seat. I sat across from his desk, placing my purse carefully on my lap. Emily and Jason sat beside each other. A united front. Or at least, that's what they wanted it to look like. Mr. Harris took his seat, folding his hands again. I understand there are some concerns, he began carefully. Emily leaned forward immediately. Yes, she said. I'm really glad we're all here together. I've been trying to explain that my mother may not be in the best position to manage her finances independently anymore. Not in the best position. Such polite words, such sharp meaning. I remained silent. Jason added smoothly, We just want to make sure everything is protected. There have been a few questionable decisions lately. I turned my head slightly. Such as I asked. He paused. Just for a second. Well, he said, for example, moving funds without consulting anyone, setting appointments like this without informing family. I don't need permission to manage my own finances. I said, my voice still calm but firmer now. Emily's tone sharpened. Mom, that's exactly the problem. You don't think you need help. I looked at her. Really looked at her. At the daughter I had raised. The little girl who once asked me if people could be rich and still be sad. Yes, I said softly. And you think I do. She exhaled sharply. Because it's obvious. Silence fell over the room. Then I turned to Mr. Harris. Robert, I said, I'd like to proceed with my appointment. He nodded slowly. Of course, Mrs. Carter. However, given what's been raised, I do need to clarify. Are you comfortable making financial decisions independently? The question was professional, required. But I could see something behind it. He wasn't asking because he believed Emily. He was asking because he needed to hear me answer. I am, I said clearly. Completely. Emily shook her head, frustration breaking through her composure. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she said, turning to him. She doesn't even see it. She's being stubborn. Stubborn. That word again. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger. Not fear. Certainty. I am not confused. I said, my voice steady but stronger now. I am not forgetful, and I am not incapable. Jason leaned back slightly, his expression tightening. Emily's voice rose just a little. Mom, please. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, I said. You are. The room went still. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Emily did something I had not expected. She stood up abruptly and turned toward the door. If this is how it's going to be, she said, her voice tense, then I think we need to take a different approach. She opened the door, and that was when everything changed. Because instead of calming down, instead of stepping back, she looked out into the lobby and raised her voice just enough. "Excuse me," she called. "Can we get security in here, please?" My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake, but something inside me broke. Not from fear, from understanding. This wasn't about helping me. This wasn't about concern. This was about control. And she was willing to humiliate me in public to get it. A security guard began walking toward the office, slowly, carefully, uncertain. Emily stepped back inside, her expression firm, almost cold now. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, though there was no apology in her eyes. "But if you won't cooperate, I have to do what's best." "What's best?" I stood up slowly, smoothing my blouse. Then I looked at the security guard as he reached the doorway. And I spoke the words that would change everything. "Before you escort me out," I said calmly, "would you please call Mr. Robert Harris's supervisor and ask him to bring the Carter file?" The room froze. Mr. Harris looked at me sharply. Emily blinked. Jason's confident expression faltered for the first time. And in that silence, I realized something very important. They thought they had prepared for this moment, but they hadn't prepared for me. The silence that followed my request was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was heavy. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes everyone in the room suddenly aware that something important is about to happen. Mr. Harris was the first to react. He straightened slightly in his chair, his eyes fixed on me not with confusion, but with something closer to recognition. "Sophia," he said, carefully lowering his voice. "Are you sure I held his gaze?" I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't. Behind me, I could hear the faint shifting of the security guard's stance, uncertain whether he was still needed. Emily, however, stepped forward again, her composure beginning to crack. "What file?" she demanded. "What are you talking about, Mom?" I didn't answer her. Not yet. Instead, I kept my attention on Mr. Harris. "Please," I said calmly, "call your supervisor." For a moment, he hesitated. Not because he doubted me, but because he understood exactly what I was asking for, and what it would mean. Then slowly, he reached for the phone. Emily let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "This is ridiculous," she said, turning to Jason. "She's trying to make a scene?" Jason didn't respond immediately. His eyes were on me now, watching, calculating, trying to figure out what I knew. That was the first crack in his confidence. Small, but real. Mr. Harris spoke quietly into the phone, his tone professional but measured. "Yes, I need you to come down to my office. Yes, it's regarding the Carter account. Yes, that one." He hung up gently. "They'll be here shortly," he said. Emily crossed her arms tightly. "I don't understand why we're doing this," she said, her voice sharper now. "We already explained everything. She's not thinking clearly, and we're trying to protect her." "Protect me?" I let the words settle for a moment before responding. "Emily," I said softly, "do you remember the first time you learned how to ride a bike?" She blinked, clearly thrown off. "What does that have to do with anything? You were 7. I continued. "You were terrified. You kept saying you were going to fall." Her jaw tightened. "Mom." "And I told you," I went on gently, "that falling wasn't the problem. Not getting back up was." She shook her head. "This isn't the same thing." "No," I said, "it's not. Because this time I wasn't the one falling. She was, and she didn't even realize it." The knock on the door came sooner than expected. 3 soft, deliberate taps. Mr. Harris stood and opened it. A tall man in his early 60s stepped inside, dressed in a dark navy suit, his expression calm but serious. Behind him, a younger woman carried a thick folder, dark worn at the edges, clearly handled many times. The Carter file. The room seemed to shrink even further as they entered. "Mr. Whitman," Mr. Harris said respectfully. "Thank you for coming." Mr. Whitman nodded, once his eyes moving across the room, taking in the situation in a single sweep. Sophisticated, observant, nothing escaped him. Then his gaze settled on me, and something in his expression softened. "Mrs. Carter," he said, stepping forward slightly. "It's good to see you again." Nothing escaped him. Then his gaze settled on me, and something in his expression softened. "Mrs. Carter," he said, stepping forward slightly. "It's good to see you again." Again. Emily turned sharply. "You've met him before I didn't look at her." "Yes," I replied. Jason's posture changed instantly. The ease he had been holding on to slipped, replaced by something more guarded. Mr. Whitman gestured toward the folder. "You asked for this to be brought out." "I did." He nodded to the woman beside him, who placed the folder carefully on the desk in front of Mr. Harris. The sound it made, soft but solid, felt louder than it should have. Emily stepped forward, her voice rising slightly. "Excuse me, but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "I'm her daughter," and Mr. Whitman raised a hand gently. "I understand who you are," he said calmly. "But this matter is between Mrs. Carter and the bank. Between me and the bank. Not her. Not Jason." For the first time since we entered the room, Emily was not in control. "This is unbelievable," she said under her breath. Jason placed a hand lightly on her arm. "Let's just hear what this is about," he said, though his tone lacked its usual confidence. Mr. Harris opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in months. But I knew exactly what they contained, because Daniel had made sure of that. "Mrs. Carter." Mr. Harris began glancing at Mr. Whitman before continuing. "Can you confirm that you wish to proceed with the instructions outlined in this file?" "I do." "Mrs. Carter." Mr. Harris began glancing at Mr. Whitman before continuing. "Can you confirm that you wish to proceed with the instructions outlined in this file?" "I do." Emily's voice cut in sharply. "What instructions?" No one answered her. Mr. Whitman stepped closer, his voice steady. "For clarity," he said, addressing the room, "this file contains legally binding directives established jointly by Mrs. Carter and her late husband several years ago." Jason went still. Emily frowned. What directives? I finally turned to look at her. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with something far more difficult to face. Truth. Protection, I said simply. For me. She shook her head. From what I held her gaze, from exactly what's happening right now, the words landed harder than I expected, even on me. Jason leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "Sophia, I think we need to slow down and talk about this." "No," I said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "We've done enough talking." Mr. Harris continued, his voice measured. "These directives specify that any attempt to alter, access, or influence Mrs. Carter's primary financial accounts without her explicit authorization triggers a review process." Emily's face paled slightly. "What does that mean?" she asked. Mr. Whitman answered this time. "It means," he said, "that concerns about Mrs. Carter's competency must be evaluated through independent legal and medical review, not family claims." The word family hung in the air like a quiet accusation. Jason's jaw tightened. Emily looked between them, confusion giving way to something closer to fear. "And until that review is completed," Mr. Harris added, "no changes can be made to her accounts by anyone other than Mrs. Carter herself." Silence, thick, unavoidable. Then Emily spoke again, her voice quieter now, but still defensive. "That's fine," she said quickly. We're not trying to take control. We're just trying to help. I nodded slowly. I know, I said, but my voice told a different story. Mr. Whitman reached into the folder and removed a single document. This, he said, placing it gently on the desk, is an additional provision. My heart tightened slightly, even though I knew what was coming. Emily leaned forward, trying to read it. What is that? She asked. Mr. Harris looked at me. I gave a small nod. He turned the document so it faced Emily and Jason. And as their eyes scanned the page, everything changed. Jason's confident mask shattered completely. Emily's breath caught audibly. Because now they were finally seeing what Daniel and I had prepared all along. And they were not ready for it. I watched their faces change. That was the moment everything shifted, not in words, but in truth. Emily's eyes moved rapidly across the document, her lips parting slightly, as if she were trying to form a question but couldn't quite get there. Jason leaned in closer, his shoulder brushing against hers, both of them reading the same lines again and again. Because they didn't believe it. Not at first. That's not possible, Emily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But it wasn't confusion anymore. It was fear. Mr. Harris remained silent, allowing the weight of the document to settle. Jason straightened slowly, his expression hardening again, but this time it was forced. What exactly is this supposed to mean? He asked, his tone controlled but tight. Mr. Whitman answered without hesitation. It means, he said calmly, that a significant portion of Mrs. Carter's assets were transferred into a protected trust structure years ago, under very specific conditions. Emily looked up sharply. A trust, she repeated. I met her gaze. Yes. Her breathing quickened. You never told me about any trust. No, I said quietly. I didn't. Jason let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. So, let me get this straight, he said. You're saying she moved her money into some kind of legal structure without informing her own family? Not some kind, Mr. Whitman corrected gently. A very carefully designed one. Emily's voice rose slightly. Why would you do that? That question. That simple, painful question. Why would a mother protect herself from her own daughter? I could feel the room watching me, waiting, judging. I didn't do it because I didn't trust you, I said slowly. Emily's shoulders relaxed just a fraction. Then I continued. I did it because I needed to be sure I would always be able to trust myself. Her expression collapsed. Because she understood what I really meant. Jason didn't. Or maybe he did, but refused to accept it. This is ridiculous, he said. You're acting like someone was trying to take advantage of you. I didn't respond, because we both knew the answer. Emily looked back down at the document, her voice trembling now. What are these conditions? She asked. Mr. Harris leaned forward slightly. The trust includes provisions that limit access to the funds unless certain criteria are met, he explained. Specifically, it prevents any third party, including family members, from gaining control or influence without independent verification of Mrs. Carter's capacity. Emily shook her head. That's not what I meant, she said. This part. What does this part mean? She pointed to a section near the bottom of the page. Mr. Whitman glanced at it briefly. Then he looked at me. Would you like me to explain? He asked. I nodded. Yes. He turned back to Emily and Jason. This clause, he said, tapping the paper lightly, activates a review process if there is an attempt to declare Mrs. Carter mentally unfit without proper legal procedure. The air in the room shifted again. Jason's eyes narrowed. Emily froze. And during that review, he continued, all account activity is monitored and any unusual behavior by involved parties is documented. Unusual behavior, Jason repeated. Yes, Mr. Whitman said, including attempts to isolate Mrs. Carter, influence her decisions, or pressure her into financial actions. No one spoke. Because now, this wasn't just about protection. This was about exposure. Emily's voice cracked slightly. We weren't doing any of that, she said quickly. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a slow breath. Emily, I said gently, you just called security to have me removed from a bank meeting about my own finances. Her face flushed. That's not the same thing she insisted, isn't it? I asked. Jason stepped in quickly. Look, this is getting blown out of proportion, he said. We're just trying to help her manage things responsibly. Mr. Harris spoke carefully. With all due respect, he said, Mrs. Carter appears fully capable of managing her affairs. Jason's jaw tightened. You're not a doctor? He snapped. No, Mr. Harris replied calmly. But I am required to assess whether a client understands the DC signs they are making. And she does. You're not a doctor, he snapped. No, Mr. Harris replied calmly. But I am required to assess whether a client understands the decisions they are making. And she does. Emily looked between them, panic rising. So what happens now? She asked. Mr. Whitman answered. Now, he said, we proceed with the formal review process since concerns about competency have been raised. Emily blinked. Review? What review? A neutral evaluation, he explained, conducted by independent professionals, legal and medical. Her eyes widened. That's not necessary, she said quickly. I mean, we didn't officially. You raised concerns, he said gently. That's enough to initiate the process. Jason's voice dropped lower. And what does that mean for access to the accounts? Mr. Harris didn't hesitate. It means, he said, that no one other than Mrs. Carter will have any authority over those accounts until the review is complete. Jason leaned back in his chair, slowly, carefully, trying to hide the shift in his expression. But I saw it. For the first time, he looked worried. Emily, on the other hand, looked like the ground had disappeared beneath her. I didn't want this, she said softly, almost to herself. I felt something twist in my chest. Because I believed her. In her own way, she probably hadn't. But intention didn't erase impact. You wanted control, I said quietly. Her head snapped up. No, she said. I wanted to make sure you didn't make a mistake. And who decides what a mistake is, I asked. She didn't answer, because she couldn't. Jason stood up suddenly. This is going nowhere, he said. We're done here. He reached for Emily's arm. Let's go. But she didn't move. Her eyes were still locked on the document, on the truth she hadn't expected to find. There's more, she said quietly. Jason paused. What? She pointed again. This part. What is this about secondary authorization? Mr. Whitman glanced at it, then looked at me again. I gave him a small nod. He turned back to them. That, he said, is a contingency clause. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. For what? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch. Let the weight build. Then he spoke. In the event that Mrs. Carter is ever declared legally incompetent, Jason leaned forward again. The trust does not transfer control to family members. The words landed like a shockwave. Emily's breath caught. Jason went completely still. Then who? Emily asked, her voice barely audible. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't soften the truth. "Someone Daniel and I chose?" I said. Her eyes widened. "Not you, no." The word echoed louder than anything else in the room. Jason's voice came out sharper now. "Who?" he demanded. I held his gaze. "You'll find out," I said calmly. "But not today." The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was final, because now they understood something they had never considered before. This wasn't a situation they could control. It wasn't even one they fully understood. And whatever they thought they were walking into when they came to that bank, they had already lost. The room didn't feel like a bank anymore. It felt like a courtroom. And somehow, I wasn't the one on trial. Jason's question, "Who?" still hung in the air, sharp and demanding. But I had already given my answer. Not today, not yet. Because some truths need time, not to soften the impact, but to make sure the people hearing them can't run from what they mean. Jason exhaled slowly, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're being dramatic," he said. "This isn't some kind of mystery game." I tilted my head slightly. "No," I said. "It's not." Emily hadn't moved. Her eyes were still locked on the document, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk, as if it were the only thing holding her steady. "You chose someone else," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. "Yes," I said. Her lips trembled. "But I'm your daughter." There it was. Not anger. Not accusation. Something far more fragile. A wounded belief. I felt the weight of that sentence settle deep in my chest. "I know," I said softly. Jason stepped forward again, his patience wearing thin. "Okay, enough," he snapped. "We're not going to sit here and play guessing games. If there's someone else involved in this, we have a right to know who it is." Mr. Whitman's voice cut in calmly. "No," he said. "You don't." Jason turned sharply toward him. "Excuse me." "The trust was established with clear legal authority," Mr. Whitman continued. "Mrs. Carter is under no obligation to disclose beneficiary or successor information at this time." Jason's jaw clenched. "You're saying we're just supposed to accept that some stranger is going to take control of her assets if something happens to her?" "Not a stranger," I said quietly. He looked at me, then who he demanded again. I held his gaze. "Someone who showed up," I said. The words hit harder than I expected. Emily flinched. Jason frowned. "What does that mean?" I let out a slow breath. "It means," I said, "someone who was there when your father was sick. Someone who didn't disappear when things got difficult. Someone who didn't treat me like a responsibility that needed to be managed." Emily shook her head quickly. "That's not fair," she said. "You know I had my own life, my own responsibilities, I know," I said gently. And I did, but knowing didn't erase the truth. Jason crossed his arms. "So this is about guilt now," he said. "You're punishing her for not being around enough." I looked at him steadily. "No," I said. "I'm rewarding someone who was." Silence. Heavy, unavoidable. Emily's eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not anger, not defensiveness, but something closer to regret. "You could have told me," she said quietly. "I tried," I replied. She blinked. "When?" "More times than you probably remember." Her gaze dropped, because deep down, she did remember. The phone calls she cut short, the visits she postponed, the moments she promised she'd make time for and didn't. Jason, however, wasn't done. "This is still insane," he said. "You're making permanent decisions based on temporary situations." "Temporary," I repeated softly. He hesitated, and that was all I needed. Your father's illness wasn't temporary, I said. Loneliness isn't temporary. Being ignored isn't temporary. Emily winced. Jason looked away. Mr. Harris C. leered his throat gently. Mrs. Carter, your father's illness wasn't temporary, I said. Loneliness isn't temporary. Being ignored isn't temporary. Emily winced. Jason looked away. Mr. Harris cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Carter, he said, would you like to proceed with updating any access permissions today? That question shifted the energy again. Because now, we weren't just talking about the past, we were deciding the future. Yes, I said. Jason turned back sharply. What are you doing? He asked. I didn't look at him. I'm making sure everything is clear, I replied. Emily's voice came out softer now. Clear about what? I finally met her eyes again. About who I trust, I said. The words landed quietly, but they cut deeper than anything louder could have. Mr. Harris nodded and began pulling up documents on his screen. You'll need to confirm your identity and authorization, he said. Of course. As he worked, Jason leaned closer to Emily, whispering something under his breath. I didn't need to hear it. I could see it. Strategy. Damage control. They weren't thinking about me anymore. They were thinking about what they were losing. That realization hurt. More than I expected, because even now, part of me had hoped. But hope has a way of fading when reality becomes too loud to ignore. Mr. Whitman stepped slightly closer to me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You're doing the right thing, he said. I nodded faintly. I just wish it didn't feel like this. He gave a small, understanding smile. It rarely does. Across the desk, Emily suddenly spoke again. Is it Rebecca? The name hung in the air, unexpected, but not entirely surprising. I looked at her, and for a moment I didn't answer, because that name carried its own weight. Jason frowned. Who's Rebecca? Emily didn't take her eyes off me. She used to help Dad, she said slowly, towards the end. Jason's expression shifted. Oh, he said, the nurse. I shook my head gently. No, I said, not just the nurse. Emily swallowed. Then what? I took a breath. Someone who became family, I said. Jason let out a disbelieving scoff. You're giving everything to a hired caregiver? No, I said firmly. I'm entrusting it to someone who earned my trust when no one else was paying attention. Emily's voice broke slightly. You think I didn't care? I looked at her. Really looked. I think you cared, I said. But I also think you assumed I'd always be here, no matter how little you showed up. Tears welled in her eyes, because that was the truth she couldn't argue with. Jason stepped in again, his tone sharper now. This is emotional manipulation, he said. You're letting feelings dictate financial decisions. I turned to him calmly. And you're pretending financial decisions don't involve feelings. He didn't respond, because he couldn't. Mr. Harris turned back toward us. Everything is ready, he said. Mrs. Carter, I just need your confirmation to proceed with the updates. I nodded. Yes. Emily's voice came out suddenly. Wait. Everyone looked at her. She took a shaky step forward. Before you do anything, I just need to know one thing. Her eyes locked onto mine. Is there any way to fix this? The question hung in the air. Not legal, not financial. Something deeper, something harder. I held her gaze. And for a moment, I didn't feel like a woman in a bank. I felt like a mother standing at the edge of something fragile, something that might already be broken. but not beyond repair. Maybe, I said, quietly. Her breath caught. What do you mean I didn't answer right away? Because the truth was, fixing this wasn't about money. It wasn't about documents. It wasn't even about the trust. It was about something far more difficult and far more honest. Fixing this, I said slowly, starts long before anything in this room. The silence that followed wasn't tense anymore. It was something else, something uncertain, because now, for the first time, Emily wasn't fighting me. She was listening, and that changed everything, Rebecca. Just hearing her name in that room pulled me somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere heavier. Not a bank, not a confrontation, but a hospital room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. I didn't answer Emily right away, because if I did, I wouldn't just be giving her a name. I would be opening a door, and once that door opened, there was no closing it again. Yes, I said, finally. The word was soft, but it carried years inside it. Emily closed her eyes for a brief second, like she had already expected the answer, but still wasn't ready to hear it. Jason let out a breath of disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. A caregiver. I didn't look at him, because this wasn't about convincing him. This was about telling the truth. She wasn't just a caregiver, I said quietly. And before anyone could interrupt, I continued. She was the only person in that room who saw your father as more than a patient. The memory hit me hard. Daniel lying in that bed weaker each day, machines beeping softly around him, and Rebecca sitting beside him, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Emily shifted uncomfortably. "I visited," she said quickly. "I know," I replied, and I meant it. She had come, sometimes, but there's a difference between showing up and staying. "You came when you could," I said gently. Rebecca stayed when it was hardest. The words weren't cruel, but they weren't soft either. They were honest, and honesty has a way of cutting deeper than anger ever could. Jason shook his head. "This is emotional bias," he said. "You're making financial decisions based on sentiment." I turned to him slowly. "And you're trying to reduce loyalty to a transaction," I replied. He didn't respond, because he couldn't. Emily's voice was quieter now. "What exactly did she do?" she asked. It wasn't defensive anymore. It was searching, so I told her. "She sat with him when he couldn't sleep," I said. "She talked to him when he forgot where he was. She held his hand when he was scared and didn't want anyone else to see it." Emily's eyes filled. I kept going. "Your father used to wait for her shift," I said softly. "He would ask what time she was coming in. Not because she was a nurse." I paused, because even now, saying it out loud still hurt, but because she made him feel like he was still himself. The silence in the room changed again. It wasn't tense anymore. It was heavy, full of things no one wanted to admit but couldn't deny. Jason crossed his arms, trying to hold on to control. "That still doesn't justify giving her control over your entire estate," he said. "I didn't give her control," I said calmly. "I gave her responsibility." He scoffed. "That's the same thing." "No," I said. "It's not." Emily looked at me again. "What's the difference?" she asked. I held her gaze. "Control is about power," I said. "Responsibility is about trust." She swallowed hard, because she understood the implication. Jason, however, wasn't ready to let go. "And you think she's more trustworthy than your own daughter?" he pressed. That question, hurt more than anything else he'd said. Because it forced Sel's head said. Because it forced I or something into the open that I had been trying to hold gently. I think she proved it, I said, quietly. Emily flinched. Jason's expression darkened. Your unbelievable something into the open that I had been trying to hold gently. I think she proved it, I said, quietly. Emily flinched. Jason's expression darkened. You're unbelievable, he said. You're letting an outsider come between you and your own family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just told the truth. She didn't come between us, I said. She stepped in where there was space. That landed hard. Emily looked like she had been physically struck, because now she couldn't pretend this was about betrayal. It was about absence. Mr. Whitman spoke carefully. For clarification, he said, Rebecca is not a direct beneficiary of the trust. Jason blinked. Wait, what? Emily looked up quickly. She's not, she asked. I shook my head. No. Jason frowned. Then what are we even talking about? Mr. Whitman continued. She has been designated as a successor trustee, he explained. That means she is responsible for overseeing the distribution of assets according to Mrs. Carter's wishes, not owning them herself. Jason's confusion turned into irritation. So she's in charge of everything he said. That's even worse. No, I said firmly. It's exactly what it needs to be. Emily's voice came out soft again. Then who gets everything? That question lingered, because that was the one they had been circling around from the beginning. The real fear, the real motive. I took a breath, and for the first time, I decided to answer it. The trust outlines specific distributions, I said, based on conditions. Jason narrowed his eyes. What conditions? I met his gaze. Respect, I said. He frowned. What connection? I continued. Presence. Effort. Emily's voice trembled. You can't put that in a legal document? I looked at her. You'd be surprised what you can put in writing, I said gently. Mr. Harris nodded slightly. There are behavioral clauses, he confirmed. Incentive-based distributions tied to demonstrated involvement and support. Jason stared at him. You're telling me we have to earn access to her own money? I didn't hesitate. Yes. The word echoed through the room. Emily's eyes widened. Jason let out a harsh laugh. That's insane. No, I said. It's accountability. He shook his head. This is punishment. I held his gaze. No, I said again. It's a second chance. That shifted something. Not a chance. That shifted something. Not I and Jason, but in Emily, because she wasn't hearing control anymore. She was hearing opportunity. What does that mean? She asked softly. I turned toward her fully now. It means, I said, that nothing is final yet. And Jason. But in Emily, because she wasn't hearing control anymore. She was hearing opportunity. What does that mean? She asked softly. I turned toward her fully now. It means, I said, that nothing is final yet. Her breath caught. It means you still have a choice. Tears rolled down her cheeks now. A choice to do what I didn't look away. To show up, I said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Jason stepped back, frustrated, shaking his head. This is manipulation, he muttered, but his voice sounded weaker now, because the room had already shifted. This wasn't about control anymore. It was about truth. And truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. Emily wiped her face slowly. And Rebecca, she asked. What happens to her? I smiled faintly. For the first time since we walked into that room. She does what she's always done, I said. She takes care of what matters. Emily nodded slowly, as if she were finally beginning to understand. Not just the decision, but the reason behind it. And in that moment, for the first time all day, I didn't feel like I was losing my daughter. I felt like I might still be able to find her. The air in the room had changed, not all at once, but enough that I could feel it, like something invisible had shifted quietly but permanently. Emily stood there still processing everything I had said, not arguing, not interrupting, just thinking. That alone felt unfamiliar. Jason, however, hadn't changed at all. If anything, he had become more rigid, more determined, more desperate. This is still not right, he said, his voice tight with frustration. You're dressing it up however you want, but at the end of the day, you're putting a stranger between your family and what's rightfully theirs. I didn't react immediately, because I had heard that tone before, not just from him, from others. People who believed that blood alone was enough. That family meant entitlement, regardless of actions, regardless of presence, regardless of truth. What's rightfully yours? I asked quietly. Jason blinked, caught slightly off guard. What you said rightfully theirs, I repeated. So tell me, what exactly do you believe you're entitled to? His expression hardened. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. But it was. We both knew it. Emily looked between us, tension rising in her shoulders again. Jason? She murmured. But he wasn't stopping now. I'm talking about fairness, he insisted. About family. About the fact that you don't just replace your own daughter with someone else because of a difficult period. I held his gaze steadily. I didn't replace her, I said. His jaw tightened. Then what would you call it? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just told him the truth. I stopped pretending that nothing had changed. That hit harder than anything else I could have said, because it stripped away the illusion. Emily took a small step back, as if she needed space to breathe. Jason scoffed. This is unbelievable, he said. After everything we've done, I tilted my head slightly. Everything you've done, I repeated. He hesitated, just for a second, but that was enough. Emily looked at him, really looked at him. What have we done? She asked quietly. The question wasn't directed at me. It was directed at him. And suddenly, he didn't have an easy answer. Jason frowned. That's not the point, he said. We've been here. We've supported her. I raised an eyebrow slightly. When I asked, his irritation flared. You can't just erase the past few years. I'm not erasing anything I said. I'm remembering it clearly. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Emily's breathing had changed. Slower. More controlled. As if she were trying to steady herself against something deeper than just this conversation. Jason stepped closer again, lowering his voice slightly. This is about money, he said bluntly. Let's stop pretending it's not. There it was, out in the open. Finally. Emily flinched. Jason, she whispered. But he kept going. You're setting up these so-called conditions, putting some outsider in charge, making everything complicated, and for what he said. To make a point, I shook my head slowly. No, I said. To protect what matters. He let out a sharp laugh. No, you're protecting control. I met his gaze. No, I said again. I'm protecting meaning. He stared at me, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond, because this wasn't a language he understood. Emily, however, she did. I could see it in her eyes. Something was shifting. Something real. She turned to Jason. Why does it matter so much? She asked quietly. He blinked. What do you mean? The money, she said. Why are you so focused on it? He frowned, clearly not expecting that question from her. Because it's important, he said. Because it's security. Because it's what families pass down. Emily shook her head slightly. No, she said. That's not all it is. Jason's expression tightened. What are you saying? She hesitated, and for a moment I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who asked questions. The one who listened. The one who cared. I'm saying, she started slowly, it feels like you're more upset about losing the money than about what Mom actually said. The words landed hard. Jason's face darkened. That's not true, he snapped. Then what is it? She asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away, because deep down he knew, and so did she. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, revealing. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to, because this wasn't my moment anymore. It was theirs. Finally, Jason exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You're turning this into something it's not. Emily didn't back down. For once, she said quietly, I think it's exactly what it is. That surprised me. Not because she said it, but because she believed it. Jason looked at her frustration and disbelief mixing in his expression. You're seriously taking her side right now? Emily swallowed. I'm trying to understand her, she said. And maybe you should too. That was the first real crack. Not in the argument, but in the dynamic. Jason stepped back, running a hand through his hair. This is insane, he repeated. All of this over some nurse who got too emotionally involved. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, something deeper. Don't reduce her to that, I said quietly. He looked at me. Then what should I call her? I held his gaze. Call here someone who showed up when it mattered, something deeper. Don't reduce her to that, I said quietly. He looked at me. Then what should I call her? I held his gaze. Call her someone who showed up when it mattered. Emily nodded faintly, almost without realizing it. Jason noticed, and that's when something shifted in him. Not understanding, not empathy, but something else. Fear. You're really going through with this, he said. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a realization. Yes, I said. He looked at Emily, then back at me, and for the first time, his confidence cracked. What happens if something happens to you? He asked. It sounded like concern, but I could hear the layer beneath it. Calculation. Then the trust does exactly what it was designed to do, I said, and we have no control, he pressed. I didn't hesitate. No. That answer hit him harder than anything else, because now there was no illusion left, no assumption, no fallback, just reality. Emily's voice came out soft. Maybe that's the point, she said. Jason turned to her. What? She looked at him steadily. Maybe we were never supposed to have control, she said. Maybe we were supposed to have a relationship. The room went still, because that was the truth. The one we had been circling around from the beginning. Jason didn't respond, because he couldn't. And for the first time since we walked into that bank, He wasn't the loudest voice in the room anymore. Emily turned back to me. Her eyes were still wet, but clearer now, stronger. "I don't know if I can fix everything," she said quietly, "but I want to try." My heart tightened, because those were the words I had been waiting to hear. Not perfection, not apology, just willingness. And sometimes that's where healing begins. I nodded slowly. "That's all I needed to hear," I said. And for the first time, this didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. Jason wasn't done. I could see it in the way his shoulders squared again, in the way his jaw tightened, like someone refusing to accept a verdict that had already been delivered. He wasn't going to walk away quietly. Not from this. Not from what he believed he was losing. "This isn't over," he said, his voice lower now, but sharper, not loud, calculated. I had heard that tone before. Not in this room, but in meetings, in negotiations, in moments where people stopped pretending and started strategizing. Emily noticed it too. "Jason," she said softly, almost like a warning. But he didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on me. "You think you've got everything figured out?" he continued. "But you're making a mistake." I tilted my head slightly. "A mistake, I asked." "Yes," he said firmly. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. And when that happens, people get taken advantage of." There it was. A new angle. Not anger. Not entitlement. Fear. Manufactured. Strategic. I didn't interrupt, because I wanted to hear how far he would go. "You don't really know this woman," he added. "Not the way you think you do." Emily frowned slightly. "That's not fair," she said. Jason turned to her quickly. "You weren't there," he said. "You didn't see how close she got, how involved she became." Emily hesitated, and I saw it. Doubt, small, but present. Jason saw it too, and he moved in. "That's how these things happen." He continued softer now. "People gain trust. They make themselves indispensable. And then, that's enough." My voice cut through his words. Not loud, but final. The room went still. Jason blinked. Not expecting that, I stepped forward slightly. "For someone who wasn't there," I said, "you seem very confident about what happened." His expression hardened. "I'm just being realistic." "No," I replied calmly. "You're being convenient." That hit. He didn't respond immediately, because he knew exactly what I meant. Emily looked between us again, tension pulling at her expression. "Mom," she started, uncertain. I turned to her and softened my voice. "This isn't about defending Rebecca," I said gently. "This is about not allowing someone else to rewrite what I lived through." Emily swallowed. Jason exhaled sharply. "You're ignoring the risk," he insisted. "You're trusting someone outside the family with everything." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said, and I didn't apologize for it. That frustrated him. "You don't even see how dangerous that is," he pressed. I held his gaze. "I see exactly what it is," I said, "and I chose it anyway." Silence, because that was the part he couldn't control. Choice. Emily stepped forward slightly. "Jason, maybe we should just—" "No," he said, quickly cutting her off, because he wasn't ready to let go. "Not yet. This affects both of us," he said, turning to her now. "Our future, our stability." That word, stability, it landed differently this time. Emily frowned. "Is that what this is about?" she asked quietly. Jason hesitated. Just long enough. And that hesitation? It said everything. He recovered quickly. Of course it is, he said. What else would it be about? Emily looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside her shifted again. You didn't even ask her how she felt, she said softly. Jason blinked. What? You didn't ask why she made this decision? Emily continued. You didn't ask what she went through. You just argued. Her voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed, and that hit harder. Jason's frustration rose again. Because the decision doesn't make sense. It makes sense to her, Emily said. And that should matter. The room went quiet again. Because now, this wasn't just between Jason and me. This was between them. Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. You're not thinking clearly, he said to her. You're getting pulled into this emotionally. This was between them. Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. You're not thinking clearly, he said to her. You're getting pulled into this emotionally. Emily shook her head. No, she said. For the first time, I think I'm actually seeing clearly. That landed. Hard. Jason stopped pacing, looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't have control of the conversation. I stayed quiet, because this wasn't my moment. This was theirs. You're choosing her over me, he asked. The question came out sharper than he intended. Emily flinched. That's not what this is, she said. Then what is it? He demanded. She hesitated. And then, she answered, it's me realizing that maybe we've been wrong. Jason stared at her. Disbelief, anger, fear, all mixing together. No, he said. No, we haven't. Emily's voice trembled slightly. Then why does this feel so uncomfortable? She asked. Because it's unfair, he snapped. Or because it's true, she replied softly. That silence, it stretched longer this time. He couldn't answer that, not honestly, and we all knew it. Jason looked away first, breaking eye contact, breaking control. I took a slow breath, because this was the turning point. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Emily turned back to me. I don't expect you to change anything, she said quietly. I just want to understand how to make things right. My chest tightened, because those words, they mattered, more than anything else that had been said in that room. You already started, I said gently. She nodded faintly. Jason shook his head, still trying to regain footing. This is insane, he muttered. You're both acting like this is some kind of moral lesson instead of a legal disaster. I looked at him calmly. Sometimes I said those two things overlap. He scoffed, but there was no confidence behind it anymore. Just frustration. And something else. Loss. Because he could feel it now. The control. He could feel it now. The control, the narrative, the certainty, all slipping away. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat slightly. Mrs. Carter, he said carefully, if you're comfortable, we can proceed with formal acknowledgement of the trust structure. I nodded. Yes, the narrative, the certainty, all slipping away. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat slightly. Mrs. Carter, he said carefully, if you're comfortable, we can proceed with formal acknowledgement of the trust structure. I nodded. Yes. Jason looked at me sharply. You're really finalizing this, right now? I met his gaze. It was finalized the moment I signed it, I said. This is just you catching up. That stung. He exhaled sharply, looking at Emily. "Say something," he urged. Emily looked at him, then at me, and then… She made her choice. "I think we should listen," she said. "Not loud, not dramatic, but firm." Jason's shoulders dropped slightly. Because that was it. The moment he realized he wasn't leading this anymore. And for the first time since we walked into that bank, the power dynamic had completely shifted. Not because I forced it, not because I demanded it, but because the truth finally had space to exist. And in that space, the power dynamic had completely shifted. Not because I forced it, not because I demanded it, but because the truth finally had space to exist. And in that space, everything changed. The room slowly exhaled. Not all at once, but piece by piece, like something that had been held too tightly for too long was finally being released. Mr. Whitman stepped aside quietly, organizing papers, giving us space, without saying it out loud. Jason had stopped arguing, not because he agreed, but because he had run out of ground to stand on. He stood near the window, now arms crossed, staring out, but not really seeing anything. Emily and I were still facing each other, and for the first time since she walked into that bank. There was no wall between us, just distance, the kind that comes from time, from choices, from things left unsaid. "I don't even know where to start," she said softly. Her voice sounded smaller now, not weak, just real. I took a slow breath. "You don't have to start anywhere perfect," I said. "Just start honestly." She nodded faintly. Her hands were trembling slightly. I noticed. She noticed that I noticed. And for a brief second, we both remembered. All the small moments. All the versions of us that used to exist before everything became complicated. "I was angry," she said. The words came out quickly, like she had been holding them back for years. "I thought you didn't need me anymore," she continued. "That you had your own life, your own routine, and I just didn't fit into it." I listened, really listened, because this wasn't about correcting her. It was about understanding her. I didn't know how to come back, she admitted, and instead of trying, I just stayed away. There it was. Not neglect, not indifference, avoidance, pain dressed as distance. "I kept telling myself I'd call," she said, "that I'd visit, that I'd fix it." Her voice cracked slightly, but the longer I waited, the harder it became. I nodded slowly. "I know that feeling," I said. She looked at me surprised. "You do?" I smiled faintly. "Yes," I said, "just from the other side." That landed, softly, but deeply. Her eyes filled again. "I didn't think it hurt you that much," she whispered. That was the truth she had been living with, and it explained everything. I stepped a little closer. "It didn't hurt all at once," I said gently. "It happened slowly." She closed her eyes briefly, as if that made it worse. "Every missed call," I continued. "Every holiday you said you were too busy. Every time I told myself, she'll come around." My voice stayed calm, but my chest tightened. "Those things add up," I said. "They don't explode. They just settle." Emily wiped at her eyes. "I thought you were strong," she said. "I thought you didn't need me like that." I let out a soft breath. "Being strong doesn't mean not needing people," I said. "It just means you learn how to live without them when you have to." That broke something in her. I could see it, because that wasn't the version of me she remembered. That wasn't the mother she thought she had left behind. "I didn't want you to have to live without me," she whispered. "But you did anyway." Silence. heavy, but not hostile, just honest. Jason shifted in the background, restless, uncomfortable, because this was something he couldn't control, something he couldn't interrupt without exposing himself again. Emily took a shaky breath. "And Rebecca," she said, hesitating. I didn't look away. "What about her?" I asked. She swallowed. "I was jealous," she admitted. That surprised me, not because it was unreasonable, but because she said it out loud. "I hated the idea that someone else was there for you when I wasn't," she said, "that she got the version of you that I walked away from." I nodded slowly. "That makes sense," I said. She blinked. "You're not mad?" I shook my head. "No," I said, "because it's honest." She let out a quiet breath. Relief mixed with something else. Regret. "I never thought about what she actually did for you," Emily continued. "I just saw her as someone taking my place. You still had a place," I said gently. "You just weren't in it." That hit her. Hard. But it was the truth, and she didn't turn away from it. "I want to fix that," she said. Her voice was steadier now, stronger. "I don't know how long it'll take," she added, "and I don't expect everything to just go back to how it was." I shook my head slightly. "It won't," I said, and I didn't soften that, because false hope would only hurt us both. "But that doesn't mean it can't become something new," I added. She nodded. Slowly, carefully, like she was holding on to that idea. Jason let out a quiet scoff from the side. "Unbelievable. But that doesn't mean it can't become something new," I added. She nodded, slowly, carefully, like she was holding on to that idea. Jason let out a quiet scoff from the side. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Emily turned to him, not angrily, but firmly. "Stop," she said. Just one word. But it carried weight. He looked at her, surprised, because that wasn't the Emily he had been speaking over just minutes ago. "This doesn't involve you right now," she added. That changed everything. Jason's expression shifted, from frustration to something closer to disbelief. "You're serious?" he asked. Emily didn't hesitate. Yes, and she didn't look away. He stared at her for a long second, then shook his head. "Fine," he said, but it wasn't agreement. It was withdrawal. He stepped back further, physically removing himself. But emotionally, he was already outside the conversation. Emily turned back to me. And in that moment, it was just us. No tension, no audience. Just a mother and a daughter trying to find their way back to each other. "I'm sorry," she said. Not rushed, not forced, but real. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw not just who she had become, but who she still was underneath everything. "I know," I said softly, and I meant it. Because sometimes apology isn't about the words. It's about the moment they finally come. We stood there in silence for a while. Not awkward, not strained, just quiet. And in that quiet, something fragile began to rebuild. Not trust, not yet, but something just as important. Willingness. And sometimes, that's where everything starts again. The conversation didn't end dramatically. There was no final argument, no slammed doors, no raised voices, just something quieter, something heavier. Jason was the first to move. Emily, he said, his tone tight, controlled again, but different this time. Less confident. More urgent. We need to talk. Emily didn't respond immediately. She stood beside me, her arms loosely folded, not defensive, just grounded. I'm talking right now, she said calmly. Jason exhaled sharply. This isn't the place for this, he insisted. We should step outside. Outside, away from me, away from everything that had just been said. Emily noticed it too. You mean somewhere I can't hear both sides? She asked. That landed harder than anything else she had said so far. Jason's expression flickered. That's not what I meant. You mean somewhere I can't hear both sides? She asked. That landed harder than anything else she had said so far. Jason's expression flickered. That's not what I meant. But it's what you're doing, she replied. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't bend either. And that was new, very new. Jason glanced at me briefly, then back at her. This is getting twisted, he said. You're letting this turn into something it's not. Emily shook her head slowly. No, she said. I think I've been ignoring what it actually is. Silence followed. The kind that makes people uncomfortable, because it forces them to sit with something they don't want to accept. Jason stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. You're emotional right now, he said. That's understandable, but we shouldn't make decisions like this in the moment. There it was again. Control. Disguised as concern. Emily didn't step back, but she didn't lean in either. I'm not making a decision, she said. I'm listening. Jason let out a short laugh. That's exactly how decisions get made. Emily held his gaze. Then maybe I should have been listening a long time ago. That hit him, hard, because it wasn't about this moment anymore. It was about all the moments before it, all the times she had trusted him to interpret things for her, all the times she hadn't questioned him. And now she was. Jason's jaw tightened. You're acting like I've done something wrong, he said. Emily didn't answer immediately. She thought about it, really thought. And that pause, it said more than any immediate response could. I think, she began slowly, you've been deciding what things mean before I even get to understand them myself. Jason blinked. That's not fair. Maybe not, she said, but it's how it feels. Feelings. Something he couldn't argue away with logic. Something he couldn't control with certainty. I stayed quiet. Because again, this wasn't my conversation. This was theirs. Jason ran his hand over his face, frustration building. I've been trying to protect us, he said, from what I stayed quiet. Because again, this wasn't my conversation. This was theirs. Jason ran his hand over his face, frustration building. I've been trying to protect us, he said. From what? Emily asked. He hesitated, and that hesitation, it opened the door. From bad decisions, he said finally. From people taking advantage of you. Emily's eyes softened slightly. Not in agreement, but in recognition. That might have been true sometimes, she said. But not all the time. Jason shook his head. You don't know that. Emily looked at him carefully. No, she said, but neither do you. That landed deep. Because for the first time, she wasn't accepting his certainty as fact. She was questioning it, and he didn't know how to respond to that, not without losing control. I think we should go, he said finally. His tone changed again, less confrontational, more distant. Emily frowned slightly. Go. Yes, he said. This isn't productive anymore. That word. Productive. Like this was a meeting. Like this was something that needed to be managed. Emily looked at him, then at me, and then she made another choice. You can go if you want, she said quietly. I'm staying. Jason stared at her, as if he hadn't heard correctly. You're staying, he repeated. She nodded. Yes. That moment. It was quiet, but it was louder than anything that had happened so far. Because it wasn't about argument anymore. It was about alignment. And she wasn't aligned with him. Not right now. Jason's shoulders tensed. You're choosing this over us? He asked. There was that framing again. Emily shook her head. I'm choosing to understand my mother, she said. And if that feels like a threat to us, then maybe we need to talk about why. That was the shift. Not rebellion, not anger, clarity. Jason looked at her for a long moment, and I could see it in his eyes. He was recalculating, trying to figure out how to regain control. But there wasn't an easy way back now. Not after everything that had been said. Fine, he said finally. But this time, there was no fight left in it. Just distance. He turned away in it. Just distance. He turned slightly, not fully leaving, but stepping out of the center, out of the conversation, out of the influence he had been holding on to. Emily let out a slow breath, like she had been holding it for a long time, and only now felt safe enough to release it. She turned back to me. I didn't realize how much I was filtering things she admitted, through him. I nodded. Not in judgment, just acknowledgement. It happens, I said, when you trust someone. She gave a small, sad smile. I trusted him more than I trusted myself. That was honest, painfully honest, and necessary. You're starting to change that, I said. She looked at me. Do you think it's too late? That question, it carried years in it. Years of distance, of silence, of missed chances. I shook my head slowly. No, I said, because you're here now. She swallowed, emotion rising again. I should have been here sooner. Yes, I said, and I didn't soften that, because truth matters more than comfort. But you're here now, I repeated, and that still matters. She nodded, holding on to that. Behind us, Jason remained quiet, but not still. I could feel it, the tension, the resistance, the slow realization that things were shifting in ways he couldn't fully stop. And that was the part he wasn't used to. Not have was the part he wasn't used to. Not having control, not being the one guiding the outcome. Mr. Whitman approached again carefully. Mrs. Carter, he said, we can proceed with a final documentation when you're ready, in control. Not being the one guiding the outcome. Mr. Whitman approached again carefully. Mrs. Carter, he said, we can proceed with final documentation when you're ready. I nodded. Give us a few more minutes, I said. Of course. He stepped back again. Emily looked at the documents on the table, then back at me. I want to understand everything, she said, not to challenge it, just to know. I studied her face, looking for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that felt performative, but there was none. Just sincerity, and something new, respect. Okay, I said, and I meant it, because this wasn't about convincing her anymore. It was about including her, not as someone entitled to control, but as someone willing to learn. Jason shifted again, still silent, still watching, but no longer leading. And that was the difference. Not a dramatic fall, Not a loud defeat, but a quiet loss of influence. And sometimes that's the most powerful kind, because it doesn't come back the same way. There comes a moment in every storm when the wind doesn't stop all at once. It just weakens, gradually, quietly, until you realize you can finally hear yourself think again. That was the moment we had stepped into. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. And sometimes that's even more powerful. I looked down at the documents in front of me. Pages that represented years of thought, of planning, of preparing for a future I once imagined would include my daughter standing beside me, not across from me. But life doesn't follow the version we expect. It follows the version we survive. "Mrs. Carter," Mr. Whitman said, gently stepping forward again, "whenever you're ready." I nodded slowly. "I am." My voice didn't shake, because this decision had already been made long before today. Today was just the moment it became visible. I reached for the pen. Familiar, simple, but heavy with meaning. Emily stood beside me, not hovering, not interfering, just present. And that alone meant more than she probably realized. Jason shifted again behind us, restless, uneasy, because now there was nothing left to interrupt. No argument left to make, no narrative left to reshape. "Emily," he said quietly, one last attempt. "You don't have to stand here for this." She didn't even look at him this time. "I want to," she said. No hesitation, no softness, just truth. I signed the first page. The sound of the pen against paper felt louder than it should have. Like a line being drawn, a boundary made permanent. Mr. Whitman nodded approvingly. "Initial here," he said, pointing. I followed. Page after page. Each signature not just a legal act, but a personal one. Each one saying the same thing. I choose this. I understand this. I stand by this. Emily watched quietly. Not questioning, not reacting, just absorbing. Jason exhaled sharply. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. But there was no fire behind it anymore. Just frustration. Just loss. I didn't look at him, because this wasn't about him. Not anymore. The last page sat in front of me. Final. Complete. I paused for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel it, the weight of what I was closing, and the quiet beginning of something new. Then I signed. Mr. Whitman gathered the documents carefully. "Everything is now finalized," he said. "As discussed, the trust structure will proceed exactly as outlined." Emily turned to him. "Can you explain that part again?" she asked. Her voice was steady, curious, present. Mr. Whitman nodded. "Of course," he said. He placed one of the copies in front of her. "Your mother has established a structured trust," he explained. "This means the assets are protected and distributed according to specific conditions and timelines." Emily listened closely. "What kind of conditions?" she asked. "Primarily safeguards," he replied. "Designed to ensure that decisions are made responsibly and independently." Jason let out a quiet scoff. "Translation," he said, "controlled access." Emily glanced at him briefly, but this time she didn't absorb his interpretation. She questioned it. "Or protection," she said calmly. Jason opened his mouth, then stopped, because he realized she wasn't defaulting to him anymore. Mr. Whitman continued. "The intention is not to restrict," he said, "but to preserve, to ensure long-term stability and prevent external influence from overriding your mother's wishes." That word, external, it hung in the air, not aggressive, not accusatory, but undeniable. Jason shifted uncomfortably. because for the first time, the room had language for what had been happening all along. Emily nodded slowly. "That makes sense," she said, and she meant it. I could hear it in her voice, not agreement out of obligation, but understanding. She turned to me. "I wish I had taken the time to learn this earlier," she said quietly. I met her gaze. "So do I replied. But there was no bitterness in it, just truth and acceptance. Jason stepped forward again. "So that's it?" he asked. "Everything just moves forward like this?" I looked at him then. Not with anger, not with resentment-y, just clarity. "Yes," I said, "it does." Jason stepped forward again. "So that's it?" he asked. "Everything just moves forward like this?" I looked at him then, not with anger, not with resentment, just clarity. "Yes," I said, "it does." He frowned. "You're shutting us out." I shook my head. "No," I said, "I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference, a big one, but only if someone is willing to see it." Jason didn't respond immediately, because there wasn't an easy argument against that. Emily spoke before he could. "She's not shutting me out," she said. Jason looked at her, confused. "Yes, she is," he insisted. Emily shook her head. "No," she said again. "She's making sure I stand on my own." That was the moment everything fully shifted. Not because I said it, but because she understood it. Jason stared at her, trying to find the version of Emily he was used to. The one who deferred. The one who followed. But she wasn't there anymore. Not in the same way. "You're okay with this?" he asked. Emily took a breath. "Yes," she said. "I think I need to be." Jason looked away, frustration building again. But now, it had nowhere to go. No leverage, no control, just resistance without power. Mr. Whitman closed the folder. "If there are no further questions, he said we can conclude here." No one spoke, because everything that needed to be said already had been. Emily turned to me. "I don't expect things to be fixed overnight," she said. I nodded. "They won't be." She swallowed. "But I want to try." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I believed her. "Then we'll try," I said. Simple, not dramatic, but real. Jason walked toward the door, not storming out, not making a scene, just leaving. And that was the final sign. Not a fight, not a victory, but a quiet exit from something he no longer controlled. The door closed behind him, softly, and in that silence, I felt something shift. Not everything, but enough. Enough to breathe differently. Enough to stand without carrying the same weight. Emily stepped closer. "Not too close, just enough." "I'm still here," she said. I nodded. "I see that." And this time, I did. The silence after everything was over felt different from the silence before. Before it had been heavy, filled with things unsaid, misunderstood, ignored. Now it was quieter in a new way, not empty, but open, like a room that had finally been cleared after years of clutter. Emily and I walked out of the bank together, not side by side, not quite, but not distant either, somewhere in between. And for the first time in a long time, that space didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt honest. The late afternoon sun stretched across the parking lot, warm but not harsh. Emily paused beside her car, then looked at me. I don't really know what happens next, she admitted. Her voice wasn't anxious, just real. I nodded. That makes two of us. She gave a small smile. I guess that's fair. We stood there for a moment. Neither. We stood there for a moment, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. Because this time, the silence wasn't something we needed to escape. I meant what I said, she added after a moment, about trying, of us rushing to fill the silence, because this time, the silence wasn't something we needed to escape. I meant what I said, she added after a moment, about trying. I looked at her. I know. She shifted her weight slightly. I just don't know if you believe me yet. That question, it deserved honesty, so I gave it. I believe you want to, I said. Her expression softened. That's not the same thing? No, I agreed. It's not. She looked down briefly, then back up. But it's a start. I nodded. Yes, I said. It is, and that was enough for now. Not trust, not forgiveness, but willingness. And sometimes, that's where real change begins. Emily took a breath. I think I need some time, she said, to sort out everything. That makes sense, I replied. She hesitated, then asked quietly, Do you want me to call you, or should I give you space? That question alone told me how much had already shifted. Before she would have assumed or avoided, now she was asking, respecting, considering. Call me, I said. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. Okay. We exchanged a look. Not perfect, not easy, but real. She opened her car door, then paused. I'm sorry, she said. Simple. No explanation, no defense, just truth. I held her gaze. I know, I said, and this time I did. She nodded once, then got into her car. I watched as she pulled away. Not with the same ache I used to feel. Not with that familiar sense of loss, but with something quieter, something steadier. Hope. Not loud, not overwhelming, but present. And that was enough. The drive home felt different too. The same roads, the same turns, but everything felt lighter. Not because the past had disappeared, but because I wasn't carrying it the same way anymore. When I walked into my house, the silence there felt different as well. Not lonely, just still. I set my bag down, placed the documents on the table, and stood there for a moment, letting everything settle. It's strange how life works, how you can spend years preparing for a moment, and when it finally happens, it doesn't feel like an explosion. It feels like a quiet shift, a realignment. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel something I had been holding back. Relief. Not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally changed. Something real. Something lasting. The next few days were quiet. Emily didn't call immediately, and I didn't expect her to. Some things need space, room to settle, room to be understood, not rushed, not forced. And for once, I didn't feel the urge to fill that space. I let it be. 3 days later. My phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. I looked at it for a moment. Not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. of what this meant. Then I answered. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." There was a brief pause, not awkward, just careful. "I've been thinking," she said. "I figured." She let out a small breath. I didn't realize how much of my perspective came from someone else, she admitted. "Jason." She didn't say his name, but she didn't have to. "I kept telling myself I was being reasonable," she continued, "that I was being practical, but I wasn't really questioning anything. I listened, not interrupting, because she needed to say it. I thought I was protecting my future," she said, "but I wasn't even understanding what I was protecting. That was growth. Real growth. Painful. But necessary. I should have talked to you," she added, "instead of about you." I closed my eyes briefly, letting that settle. "Yes," I said quietly. "You should have." She didn't argue, didn't defend, just accepted it. "I want to do better," she said. "Not perfectly, not dramatically, just better." "That's all I'm asking," I replied. We talked for a while longer. Nothing heavy, nothing dramatic, just small things, normal things. The kind of conversation that used to feel impossible between us. And when we hung up, I noticed something. I wasn't exhausted. I wasn't drained. I wasn't questioning everything she said. I just felt calm, and that was new. Jason never called. Not me. Not after that day. And from what Emily shared, things between them had changed. Not suddenly, not completely, but noticeably. "He's not happy," she told me during one of our calls. "I didn't expect him to be," I said. She sighed. "I think he's used to being the one who leads everything." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. And now I asked. "Now I'm asking questions," she said. There was a small pause. "And he doesn't like that. I could imagine, very clearly." "That doesn't make him wrong," I said carefully. "But it does mean things are different." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what that means for us yet," she admitted. "That's okay," I said. "You don't have to figure everything out at once." She exhaled slowly. "I just know I don't want to go back to how things were." That mattered more than any immediate answer, because it meant she had seen something, understood something, and couldn't unsee it. "You won't," I said, not as a promise, but as a truth, because once clarity arrives, it doesn't disappear. It stays, and it changes everything that comes after. A week later, Emily came over. For the first time in a long time. No tension, no agenda, just a visit. We sat in the living room, talked, laughed a little, even shared a quiet meal. It wasn't perfect. There were pauses, moments where we both felt the weight of what had been. But we didn't run from it. We let it exist, without letting it control us. And that was progress, real progress. As she stood by the door to leave, she looked at me. "I know this isn't fixed yet," she said. "No," I agreed. "But it's different." She nodded. "Yes," she said. "It is. And this time, that difference felt like something we could build on, not something we had to fight against. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't knock on your door and announce itself like a long-awaited guest. It comes quietly, in small moments, in conversations that don't turn into arguments, in pauses that no longer feel heavy, in choices that feel different than before. That's how it began for us. Not with a dramatic apology, not with a sudden transformation, but with consistency. Weeks passed, then a month. Emily and I started building something new. Not rebuilding what we had before, because what we had before had cracks we didn't see. This time, we were building something more honest, something that didn't rely on assumptions, something that allowed questions, space, respect. She came by often, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes for dinner, sometimes for no reason at all. And each time, it felt a little easier, a little more natural. We talked about things we had avoided for years. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Like carefully unpacking something fragile. There were still difficult moments. Times when old patterns tried to surface. Times when words came out sharper than intended. But we caught them. We paused. We corrected. And that made all the difference. Because before, we would have ignored those moments. Let them build. Let them turn into something bigger. Now we face them. Gently, honestly, and that changed everything. Jason remained a quiet absence in all of this, not completely gone, but no longer present in the way he once was. Emily didn't speak about him as often, and when she did, her tone had changed, less certain, more reflective. "We're still figuring things out," she told me one afternoon. We were sitting on the porch watching the sun dip lower across the yard. "What does that mean?" I asked. She sighed. "It means I'm realizing how much of myself I gave up without noticing," she said. I didn't interrupt, because this was her journey, not mine to guide. I thought being supportive meant agreeing with everything she continued, but I think I confused support with silence. That word again. Silence. It had shaped so much of our story. "I don't want that anymore," she said. I nodded slowly. "You shouldn't." She looked at me. "Do you think it's too late to change that?" I smiled softly. "It's never too late to understand yourself," I said. She let out a small breath. Relieved. Not because everything was solved, but because she had permission to keep growing. One evening, she brought over an old photo album. I hadn't seen it in years. She set it on the table between us. "I found this while cleaning," she said. We opened it together. Page after page of memories, birthdays, school events, family trips, moments that once felt simple, whole, untouched by the complexity that came later. We laughed at some of the pictures, paused at others, and there were moments we'd others, and there were moments when we both fell quiet, looking at a version of us that felt both familiar and distant. "I didn't realize how much you were always there," Emily said softly. I looked at her. I said. She nodded. "I know that now." That and we both fell quiet, looking at a version of us that felt both familiar and distant. "I didn't realize how much you were always there," Emily said softly. I looked at her. I said. She nodded. "I know that now. That was something I had waited years to hear. Not for validation, but for understanding. Real understanding. I think I took it for granted," she added. I didn't respond immediately, because that truth didn't need a reaction. It just needed to exist. And it did. "I'm sorry for that," she said. I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers. "I know," I said, and I meant it, not as a dismissal, but as acceptance. Because forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing what you carry forward. A few months later, things felt different in a way I couldn't fully explain. Not perfect, but steady, grounded, real. Emily had changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that felt forced, but in the way she approached things. She asked questions. She listened. She made decisions that were her own. And most importantly, she didn't let anyone else define her perspective. That included me, and I respected that. Because this wasn't about control. It was about independence, true independence, the kind that allows connection without dependency. One afternoon, we found ourselves back at the bank. Not for anything dramatic, just to finalize a small administrative update. But as we stood there, in the same space where everything had once unraveled, I felt something shift. Not tension, not pain, just perspective. Emily looked around, then at me. Last time we were here, she started. I smiled slightly. Yes, I said. We were very different people. She nodded. I was, she corrected gently. I tilted my head. You don't think I was? She smiled. I think you already knew who you were, she said. That's why it was so hard for me to understand you. That might have been the most honest thing she had ever said. And it didn't hurt. It felt right. We finished what we needed to do, walked out together again. But this time, there was no distance between us. No uncertainty. Just a quiet understanding. A shared awareness of everything we had been through, and everything we had chosen to become after. As I stood at my front door that evening, watching her car disappear down the street, I realized something. The moment at the bank, the one that had felt like everything was falling apart, was never about loss. It was about truth. Truth that had been waiting to be seen, heard, acknowledged. And once it was, everything else had the chance to change. Not easily, not quickly, but honestly. And that made all the difference. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning. It wasn't about being right. It was about standing firm in who you are, even when it cost you something, especially when it cost you something. Because the people who truly belong in your life will find their way back to you. Not because you gave in, but because you stood your ground and showed them where that ground was. And this time, Emily didn't just find her way back to me. She found her way to herself. And that was the real beginning. Lessons and message. Sometimes the hardest thing you will ever do in life is not walking away from someone else. It's standing still when they expect you to move. It's holding your ground when silence feels easier. It's choosing truth when it risks everything you hope to keep. Sophia's story is not just about a conflict in a bank. It's about something deeper, something many people experience but rarely confront. The fear of losing family, the pressure to keep peace at the cost of self-respect. The quiet way influence can shape our decisions without us even realizing it. Emily didn't become a different person overnight. She became aware, and awareness is where change begins. Jason didn't disappear because he was defeated. He lost influence because it no longer worked, because clarity replaced confusion. And Sophia, she didn't win by fighting. She won by refusing to abandon herself. That's the lesson. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to control to be respected. You don't have to sacrifice your truth to keep love. The right people will grow, will reflect, will return differently. And if they don't, then your peace was never meant to depend on them. So, if you've ever been in a situation where your voice was ignored, where your intentions were misunderstood, where standing up felt like losing everything, remember this: sometimes the moment that feels like everything is breaking is actually the moment everything begins to heal. If this story touched you, really love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand your ground with someone you love? Do you think Emily made the right choice? And what would you have done in Sophia's place? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? I read every single comment and your stories truly matter. CTA. Sometimes the most painful moments in life are not the ones where we lose everything, but the ones where we realize we've been losing ourselves all along. This story isn't just about a conflict in a bank. It's about something much deeper. The quiet, invisible ways we allow others to shape our decisions, silence our voices, and slowly pull us away from who we truly are. It's about the fear of confrontation, the desire to keep peace at any cost, and the heartbreaking realization that love without respect can become something unrecognizable. Sophia didn't fight to prove she was right. She stood still to prove she would no longer be wronged. And sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can do. Not raising your voice, not forcing others to understand you, but simply refusing to abandon yourself. Emily's journey reminds us that change doesn't come from being told we're wrong. It comes from seeing clearly for the first time. And that kind of clarity can be uncomfortable, even painful. But it's also where growth begins. If you've ever felt unheard, overlooked, or pressured to stay silent just to keep the peace, remember this: your voice matters. Your boundaries matter. And the people who truly love you will not disappear when you stand your ground. They will learn, reflect, and come back differently. So, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a situation where it felt like you might lose everything? What did you do, and would you do it the same way again? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories waiting for you. Stories about strength, truth, and the quiet courage it takes to choose yourself.